So my name is Gary Bartkus. My business is Gary's Guitars and Gear. I also work closely with my electronics mentor, David Shipp, who has a long-term business called TubeWorks here in Houston. I do repairs alongside of him. He has been doing it for his entire life. He's 79 years old, still going very, very strong. A lot of knowledge there. I've been playing guitar since I'm 7 years old. So I've always been a musician, and I've always been very interested in the technical side. In my professional career, I worked for a company that was information technology solution provider. And I was on the sales side of the business, but I was always interested in technical aspects. But regardless, I used to take my amps in for repair. And I got very, very tired of people talking down to me, people telling me what I could do with my amps. I remember one time I changed tubes and the amp developed a problem, and the tech said to me, well, don't change any tubes. And I was like, well, it's my amp, I can do whatever I want with it. And I decided that I wanted to start learning how to do some of these things myself. And so slowly but surely I first started learning about tubes, changing tubes in my amp. Then I learned how to bias an amp, set the current on the power tubes, and then changing filter capacitors, and then it escalated to full-blown builds and renovations of amps and fixes. So it's a whole lot easier nowadays than it was when I was growing up. I grew up, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. So when I had to learn, for example, how to play something on guitar, we had record players, and I would play, put it on the turntable, listen to a little bit, and try and imitate what was played. YouTube is a phenomenal resource for that. There's all kinds of great information out there. Now you also have to filter out what isn't so great. I would recommend Uncle Doug on YouTube. But the one thing I would tell you, if you're a guitar player and you're interested in continuing playing and writing and honing your craft, I would say don't do it, because frankly I hardly get to play anymore because I'm constantly out here in the shop working on something or buying gear and refurbishing it and selling it. But read a lot, but be very wary of forums, because there's all kinds of information out there. Some of it's very good, but sometimes it's really hard to sort out the information that isn't very good. There's a lot of bad information out there as well. But the short answer is you wouldn't know, because sometimes problems can be much deeper than what you think. If it's me, it would attract me toward that amp, because I would look at it as something that I probably could acquire below the market price, probably considerably below the market price. If you're somebody who doesn't fix amps, I might say walk away. I would not trust what the seller is saying, unless maybe you knew the person.
Right.
But,
I mean, if it only needs tubes, why didn't you swap the tubes?
Right, right,
So.
absolutely. Also, I would take into consideration if it were a vintage amp. If it's a vintage amp, one easy thing to do is take a look at those capacitors that I showed you earlier. If it's a 1960s or 70s or prior amp and has paper capacitors, they need to be changed. That's generally the biggest source of hum in an amp. But it could be a short, it could be a bad power tube, it could be a lot of things. It could be a bad transformer. But if that amp is producing sound and powers up, for me, I'm good. The short answer is yes, you can, but it's somewhat complicated if you're trying to do it from an electronic perspective. But there are a few things that you can do. Noise is something that's very important in tubes. A tube is essentially a microphone, and a series of microphones that provide levels of amplification along the circuit path. So if you, for example, on the bottom, these tubes here in this amp, if you just pluck them with your finger, like literally hit them while the amp is on like that, if you hear a loud amplified sound through the speaker, that tube is microphonic, which is not a good thing. It doesn't mean the tube is unusable. It'll just it'll amplify any superfluous noise in that amp. So that's one thing that you could tell. You certainly want to see them glowing. You certainly don't want to see like a white haze over them, because that means that the gases have released out of the tube. But really, you would need a tube tester, and you don't need a great one. You know, back in the old days, the old ham radio guys, they would just plug it in. If it worked, it was good. You know, if your amp sounds good, your tubes are probably good. So you can do that. And you can get up to all kinds of levels of sophistication, up to tube testers that are in the $3,000 range, like something like an AMPLIFIERS or an E-Tracer or something like that. I use some high-end Hickok tube testers, which were vintage but USA made in Cleveland, Ohio, and I have a number of them. I probably have more than I should ever have, 5 or 6 tube testers right now. Not exclusively, but typically, those tubes for reverb and tremolo are preamp tubes or Novel tubes. And Novel tubes are 9 pins. They're the smaller ones that you would see. The power tubes, not exclusively, there are a number of exceptions for that, but they're mostly what's known as octal tubes. The exceptions would be like an EL84 tube, which is a Novel tube, but used for power as well. The difference is in what they do. So the power tubes are just what they say. You've gone through the preamp stage, however that circuit is designed to get whatever amount of gain or tone that you're looking to get, and then the preamp tubes provide that last heavy boost of amplification. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then the tubes that you asked about, reverb and tremolo, they're just drivers, and they would amplify whatever it is that you're trying to do, or in the case of tremolo, to provide oscillation.
Right.
So for tremolo, not a vibrato, tremolo being amplitude
volume
modulation,
up and down. Right.
Volume up and down, versus the pitch being going up and down, which is a true vibrato. Very few amps are true vibrato. That tube would provide that up and down, that oscillation. In fact, if you measure the voltage on the tube, sometimes rookie techs will look at that and they go, "This voltage is whacked," and they'll have the tremolo on, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, taking it up and down.
Right.
Very easy. It'd be a multimeter, because you don't want to kill yourself. So one of the things that I do, and I think I have it right here, is this is called a snuffer. And what this is basically a resistor that has 2 alligator clips with leads on them at the end. And what I would do with this snuffer is, first of all, I'd make sure that the amp is unplugged, because I have to emphasize, you can kill yourself doing this stuff. These capacitors can hold, even when it's unplugged, very, very high voltage that can kill you or hurt you badly. And I've gotten bit by amps before, and it's not fun. So I take one end of this, and what this resistor will do is dissipate the voltage from the positive end of the capacitor. So I would just take that, put that on here, and I do that typically on, I'm doing this for illustration purposes, but I would typically do that under here in the power section, where the larger capacitors that hold a lot of charge. And it would just take that electricity that's stored in there and discharge it to the ground.
How long do you leave it hooked up?
5 seconds.
Is it instant, or is it
5 seconds?
Okay.
In fact, there's a funny story that Cesar Diaz, who was Stevie Ray Vaughan's tech, used to just hard short, take a screwdriver and hard short the capacitor against the chassis of the amp, and it'd have a big arc and a pop. But that's not good for the capacitor. So this will safely and slowly drain them. And then why that multimeter is very important is then I can go back, and I do this because I don't like getting shocked. I just take my my ground side of my multimeter and put it on the chassis, and then I go back and I measure, and I wanna see just virtually no voltage in there. I like it to be nothing. I would say the entire Fender stack. That's my forte, and that's my passion. The Fender Bassman to me is the purest, best circuit that was designed. The 410 Bassman, and it's escaping right now. I think it's this F6A, 6F6A circuit in a 410 Fender Bassman, which was the basis for Marshall building the JCM 45. Find a mentor. Find somebody who's done that, and it's hard to do. I was a customer of David's before I got into this full force, and I built that friendship and that relationship, and then slowly, as I started getting into doing more and deeper things after I retired from my professional career, I would call upon David and ask questions, and he was phenomenal and remains phenomenal about answering things for me, things that I don't know yet. His knowledge base is over a course of 60 years, where mine is not that long. You know, I've been doing this hard for 10 years. You know, I even did it while I was still working, but not full-time. I've been doing it full-time for the last 5 years. Find yourself a mentor. Learn as much of the theory as you can digest, because it is important over time. At first you'll think it's not, because if you're an intuitive person like me, you'll go, oh, there's a burnt out resistor, I replaced that, that's good. But then you get into reading schematics, you'll get into checking voltages to make sure that they are where they're supposed to be. And all the components in an amplifier are there for a reason. And they can, they all affect the sound, and they affect the voltages, and if the voltages are off, the amp is not going to sound right. And then you get into things like using an oscilloscope. And what that does is allows you to actually have a physical or a picture in real time of what's going on in that amp. So it will allow you to essentially trace that circuit and save a lot of diagnostic time by being able to go in there and know where that circuit breaks down by just looking at the waveform on a screen. And so I have not been doing that part very long, and David was really helpful in showing me how to use it. Now I use it on any amp that is troublesome. I don't use it on all the amps, but I use it often.
You are my first interview.
Okay.
On YouTube here, so I wanted to bring you an only Wonderwall pick.
Oh, awesome!
So anytime you're ready to play Wonderwall, you'll have a pick that says.
Thank you.
Anyway, here's Wonderwall.
Thank you. I appreciate that.